Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. She said almost everything, so I guess that I don't have to worry now. I do agree with her. There's always, you can teach a dog new tricks, an old dog new tricks, so that's where I am right now. And I want to say that as an introduction that I'm a mid-career professional. So all the things that you have heard that I have done and places that I've been in the field for a long time now. And I've had some experiences that I want to talk to you today in addition to my research. But first, I want to talk a little bit about who I am. I am Puerto Rican. I was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a tiny island in the Caribbean, just like all the other islands in the Caribbean. And Puerto Rico is really a beautiful place. We consider it paradise, of course, but I'm biased. But you know that Puerto Rico has been through a lot of turmoil with the hurricane. And one thing that it's important is to remember that the destruction was so great that that's still work in progress. So keep them and the people of the Caribbean in your thoughts, because this is possibly just the beginning if we consider that climate change is going to continue to keep the oceans warm, and that those warm temperatures are the ones who make the hurricanes to become stronger and stronger. So not only we get more, but they also are stronger. So just something to think about as you go on. My parents lived there. I've experienced hurricanes, but the Hugo in 1989, but it was never as complex as what they experienced this time, and they are even still going through, I think, PTSD from not only the impact of the experience of being inside and experiencing such a strong hurricane, but also from coming out and see the level of destruction that happened in the island. So that being said, my training is in public health. as I was born in the island, I did my undergraduate in science at the University of Puerto Rico. I also did my master's degree in Puerto Rico. I did a master's degree in public health at the University of Puerto Rico as well. And then I finished with a PhD that I earned at Johns Hopkins University School of, in those times it was the School of Hygiene and Public Health. Now it's known as Bloomberg School of Public Health. So as a person who is a mid-career professional, and I've been in a lot of places, I started my career as an entry-level epidemiologist when I finished my master's degree in the ATSDR, which is the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. And this really is basically an agency within the CDC that addresses issues related to how environmental pollutants have an impact on human health. When I did my master's degree, that was something of interest to me that I passed on when I did my PhD. And I actually was very fortunate that I had the opportunity to really land in a job that was exactly what I wanted to do. That was a long time ago. Then I went to do the PhD, and I worked at the Pan American Health Organization. The Pan American Health Organization is the regional office for the Americas of the World Health Organization. I spent 6 years there, where I actually work as a regional advisor. So regional advisors work with the ministries of health of the different countries, and what we do is that we do programmatic work that is related to bringing awareness, in my case, of how environmental pollutants could have an impact on human health and how to identify them. So I basically had to create projects and programs that the countries would like to implement, and I had to go and talk with the different individuals in the ministries of health of the countries who were likely to be able to do those projects in their countries. So I spent a lot of time in planes, I spent a lot of time talking to people, I spent a lot of time coming up with projects, and honestly, there were days that I would wake up and I'd be like, I don't remember which country I'm supposed to be today. Let me just look at the agenda and just kind of check it out, because the amount of travel that involved that type of work is brutal. So it was a really wonderful experience because I think it made me a much better public health worker, but it was really a very, very demanding job. Then after several years working as a programmatic person, I decided I wanted to do research. So my PhD I was trained to do research, but then I kind of went to South America and I worked on more programmatic levels. And then I really felt the need to go back and explore if research was my thing and if I could actually be a good researcher. So I went back to Atlanta because I knew Atlanta and had been there and had the opportunity to work at Emory University in a collaborative project between the CDC and Emory University. That was a really great opportunity to actually be involved in some research that I'm gonna be talking a little bit later. Then I finished my tenure with this project, and then I felt that I wanted to go into academia, but I was not completely sure that that was what I wanted to do, and I was going back and forth. So I decided, I talked to my dissertation advisor, which is always gonna be your advisor, and then he said, well, come to Finland, and then, you know, why don't you spend a year with us and we could just use your skills in international health and we can just like kind of get you on the path. So I did go to Finland. I was at the University of Oulu. This university is 120 miles south of the Arctic Circle, so it was very far north. It was an amazing opportunity to experience climate in a way that I had never experienced it, and I really loved it. I also had the opportunity to experience climate change and how it impacts you know, those latitudes, because I spent there 2 winters. The first winter was a normal winter with a normal amount of snow, and it was a lot of snow. I mean, piles of snow were much taller than me. Next year, we did not have snow. And it was like the most shocking thing after having seen so much snow the first winter and knowing that that was the normal thing, to see almost no snow, like inches of snow were accumulated towards the end of the winter. And that is bad because it's very impactful to the ecosystem, not only to myself, and the shock that you get from seeing something that is so extreme from one side to the other. Temperatures were cold, but they were not as cold, and there was not as much snow. Then after that, I started my search for a place to be, and I am here. I am really happy to be here. I have one of my colleagues is here today from the Biostatistics and Epi department, Dr. Quinn. And the main reason why I wanted to come here was because I had the opportunity. I wanted to do research where I could be in contact with people. And lo and behold, my dream became true much faster than I thought it could be possible. So anyways, I'm here. Not that it's a bad thing, but you need to be careful with what you ask, because what you wish comes, and it's a lot of work. So anyways, it ended up being a lot of work, but for a good cause though. I really want to comment about what brought me into environmental health. This is something that I learned when I was a child. Environmental education is really important. It's how you create the sensibilities on people and individuals to actually want to take care for the earth and the planet. When I was a child in Puerto Rico, when I was 5 years old in the 70s, I just wanted to watch the cartoons every Saturday. That was very important for me. I could miss everything else, but I could not miss the cartoons. And then they had these campaigns. So the advertisement was not about go buy these and go get that and stuff like that. It was about creating awareness of the environment, of conservation, of cleanliness. So we had, I have in here these bunnies. So the campaign was like the bunny puts the trash on the can, so you can all do the same thing. And that was like really something that was everywhere. So you could just not, I mean, it was bad if you didn't do like the bunny and did not put the trash on the trash can. They used art and culture as well. This man, Virgilio Dávila, was someone who was a poet, and he actually wrote about the earth and about Puerto Rico. And that was something also that was the advertisement that was used to create advertisement that would create that love for the earth. Plus, I mean, when you live in a place like the Caribbean, you cannot not be in awe of what surrounds you. So not only it's beautiful, but also we spend a lot of time outdoors because it's just too hot to be inside. So you spend outside as much time as you can, and that's part of the culture. So when you go to the beaches, you don't want the beaches to be clean. I mean, you have dirty, you want them to be clean because that's where you're gonna be. So I think all those things, but especially all those influence on conservation and environment that I had when I was young were really the reasons that made me think that environmental health was the field that I wanted to pursue. But I was not totally there because I knew I just did not want to be an environmental scientist. So I did my bachelor's degree, and I was like, I'm not sure yet what I'm gonna do, and I ran into this book. So a friend of mine told me, maybe you need to read this because you're gonna like it. So I did like it, and here I am. This book is called Medical Detectives, and it's like people who are like detectives and then try to figure out what and how a disease was caused. And that's really what epidemiology is like, at least from, there's different things that you can practice in epidemiology, but the part that I practice the most is try to understand how a disease, an outcome, or an environmental exposure can be associated with the disease, and what are the mechanisms that lead to or could explain that association. So, because this is a Women in Wednesdays, I wanted to be able to mention some women as I go along that I think are very important. Without Rachel Carson, I wouldn't be here doing this presentation. I don't know Rachel, but I mean, personally, I know her work, but I hope that as you move on, that you're able to get to know her. So Rachel Carson was a biologist, and she also, she studied animals. She was a marine biologist, so she studied wildlife, marine wildlife, and she also wrote about it, and she wrote about it for the masses. And this woman started to notice that pesticides in the environment were having an impact on wildlife ecology. That was about 1962. So she became from someone who started to write nice things, who was writing nice things, to someone that was not really that well liked, because suddenly the pesticide industry were not happy with what she was saying. And there was a lot of conflict around her work, which I actually, you know, as we have learned more and more, we can tell that it has been that pesticides and other substances on the environment have an impact on health, not only wildlife, but humans. And she was a pioneer in bringing that information to the forefront. So her book actually was so impactful that it started to launch the whole idea of environmentalism, or what is known as the modern idea of environmentalism, which it's known, some people call it a political movement. I rather would call it a movement, but it really demanded that the state preserve the earth and that the state act to regulate and, if necessary, penalize those who pollute the earth. And that has been the basis of the EPA. If you're not in the environmental field, but you have heard the EPA a lot lately, that's what the EPA does. But the environments that we live in right now, we owe to the science, the preservation, and the regulation that exists in this country. If we wouldn't have had the EPA, we would not have been where we are right now. That's one. Second, I want to mention, as a person who had worked internationally in the field of environmental health and who worked with the ministries of health, I think that we in this country were extremely fortunate that so much effort, time, intelligence, and money were put together in developing this agency and in the work that it has done. And this has been a template for many other countries in the world, at least my experience when I was in South America, to actually create regulation that protect their environments, because unfortunately, they don't necessarily have the money, the intelligence, the resources, and the ability to develop the science and the know-how, but they could actually just go ahead and apply it. So it's really important to consider. I consider that EPA, from my experience, is one of the jewels of the North American crown and has been one of the most impactful agencies, because all the work that is out there has been in one part or another influenced by the EPA. And one of the influencers is really that possibly, I think it was in the 90s, we had Carol Browner, which was another woman that I wanted to put out there, but I didn't have time for that one. And there was also the internet explosion. So this was possibly one of the first American agencies who decided to put everything on the net. So because everything was on the net, anyone around the world who had access to it could actually get hold of these documents. So I think that this is a very important contribution of the United States to the world that is actually not normally talked about when we hear news about EPA. So these actually led to the field of environmental epidemiology. So that as we learn more about how ecology was being impacted by pesticides in the environment, then we had all these questions about, is it only pesticides? Are there other chemicals that have arise from the environmental, from the Industrial Revolution? What is going on in the environment with regards to chemicals, and how can they impact health? And then it led to, for example, the foundation of the International Society for Environmental Epidemiology in 1987. So if you think that we are in 2017, this field really is very young. It's only 30 years. So it's very important to keep in mind that we're still learning about what really is impactful for health when it comes to environmental contaminants. And it's something that we want to continue thinking about. So as I finished my master's degree and I went to work at the ATSDR, I learned about environmental justice. And I think one of the important things to recognize, if you have heard about the term of environmental justice, you have heard how there has been many communities around the United States where people who are poor, rural, of color, have been highly impacted by environmental pollution, because those are the places where the companies want to go and dump their stuff. Maybe a landfill is built next to you that will hold all those chemical contaminants. Maybe companies live around those areas, and those companies are not really taking well care of how they put their chemical emissions out there, et cetera. I mean, obviously this was 1982, so there's still a lot of growing up to do with regards to environmental regulation. But this Warren County, North Carolina, was the first time where there was a community that decided to use, I wanted to say copy, but copy is not the word, but use what was learned from the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King with regards to making peaceful statements about concerns. And they actually, when trucks were coming to do the construction on the landfill, people would just put themselves, lay down on the floor or on the road to prevent that from happening. So this was the first time in the United States where a community really step up and say, we really need you to think how's that gonna impact us. And it was, for me, kind of being in this agency was a turning point with regards to understanding better, not only the civil rights movement, but also how that turned into the environmental justice movement, and how, and I had the opportunity to work in many circumstances where we were working with small communities with similar characteristics that were close to Superfund sites with our companies, which are circumstances where there is environmental chemicals in the air, ground, and water, and there is evidence of human exposure. I also learned about the children's environmental health movement, and then that was also a time when there was a lot of regulation, but the regulation was aimed at evaluating or thinking, oh, this is how an adult will be impacted. And there was no thought about the fact that the bodies of children could be more impacted than those of the adults for several reasons that I list here. And that actually we really need to think that maybe a dose that if we regulate on the basis of a dose that have an impact on the adult, we're actually not protecting the children. And that was important because children would be, because they are constantly growing, they breathe more air, consume more food, drink more water. Therefore, if there's contaminants in the environment, in the air, on the water or the food, they are actually going to ingest more than an adult. Their body is developing, so they are more vulnerable than a developed body to environmental insults. They also behave differently, so they cannot take care of themselves. Well, they have little control of the environment, they cannot take care of themselves. And they also spend too much time close to dirt, which could actually be a source of environmental pollution. And then, as an entry-level epidemiologist, I had the opportunity to be able to lead a study. And it was a study where we looked at determinants of blood lead levels in children. It was a really, it was a situation where we were working with a community that was close to a lead smelter. This was in the Bunker Hill lead smelter in Silver Valley, Idaho. It seems like a long time ago. So we looked at different factors, not only individual factors of the children who participated in the study, but we also looked at aspects that were related to the remediation processes that had been done there. And basically what we found was that removal of lead contaminated soil from residential yards was associated with lower blood lead levels in children. So that was really important from the point of view of remediation, because it was like, okay, first, the remediation may be working. Second, should we adopt that as a practice that should be expanded into other places, because this was one of the first places where that had been conducted. So actually, I have to say that I feel very fortunate that I had the opportunity to do this work. And it was so impactful that I really got the award for Employee of the Year in 1994, which was really nice considering that I was still studying in the field. And I also want to say that one of the things that is important is like this lady here was my boss. Her name is Wendy Kay, and she actually was the one who set me for success. And not only did she invite me to go and work with her, and believe me, my English was really not that good. So I was like, I don't know how she's taking that risk, but I'm gonna take it. And I guess that she figured out that I could pull this off, but really, my English was not great. And she would tell me, I don't think that I understand you. Why don't you just go back and think about it again and come back? So it's not been easy, but I cannot just talk about these without mentioning her, because she certainly had been very influential in being who I am today and where I am today. So then I did my doctoral program. I left the ATSDR and I went into my doctoral program. And I was able to come up with my doctoral research, which was related to ambient air pollution. So ambient air pollution was like the big thing those days, and I really wanted to learn about ambient air pollution the best I could. So, the best thing is to do my dissertation on ambient air pollution. So I looked at how different pollutants, including carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitric oxides, and particles had an impact on health. And as I was, from my tenure at ATSDR, the things that interest me were children's health and how children's health could be impacted. Then one of the things that I wanted to do was, the best thing we had at that point was like, well, at least let's see how the infant could be affected. Would that have, elevated levels of ambient air pollution had an impact on low birth weight. So that was, so we did a couple of papers out of that. The big one was the one where we look at associations between ambient air pollution and low birth weight. And the associations were weak, but they were suggestive. And out of there was a lot of work that followed by other researchers on how to actually continue to explore, address the limitations that my study had, and come up with better study designs that could actually confirm or deny whether these associations were true. So I actually want to comment. Then I went to South America and I worked as a technocrat, then decided to come back, and here I was at this project, which was prenatal exposures to endocrine disrupting chemicals and HAT menarche. This was a collaboration of many people, and again, there's women who are really powerful and who were also instrumental for me to do the research that I'm gonna be talking about now, and I think they have to be mentioned. Michelle Marquez is from Emory University. She is the person that I work with, and so I was sitting on Emory. And then there was Carol Rubin, who was from CDC, from the National Center for Environmental Health, and also Jean Golding. Jean Golding is actually from the University of Bristol, which is the one that had the cohort, which is the AVON longitudinal study of parents and children. They call it the Children's of the 90s. This was a cohort that started in the 90s, and then it still followed to date. And then Michelle Marquez and Carol Rubin came up with the idea of using this cohort to look at how environmental exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals during your fetal stage could actually have an impact later on reproductive health. So there were different factors that actually impacted these ladies' desire to actually do that research. One is that the cohort was available, but the most important thing is that when it comes to women's health, we have had decreasing fertility rates over time worldwide, and there's a question as to whether, we know that there's like a whole lot of access to health and contraceptive methods, but then there's also an increase in the number of people who looks for help to conceive. So the question is, could this really be an issue that is related to access to health services and changes in society and economy, or could this be that there are other factors that are related to these changes in fertility rates? So one of them is, the idea, well, if there has been some information that reproduction can be affected by chemicals, could this actually be another reason why the rates are going down through time? Then there's also another question that has been discussed for the last decade, which is the changes in the HAT menarche and how HAT menarche in girls is occurring at much earlier ages now than it used to be in the past. And this is also a worldwide trend. So it's noticed everywhere. And then there has been things that have been mentioned about it. One of them has to do with the fact that there's more access to food. So increases in food availability, improvements in the economy, in health, and also in regards to, and then the other issue is obesity, because it's not. So the obesity is the other thing that could explain these trends, because the obesity epidemic has also, the obesity rates keep increasing, and we know that girls who are obese tend to have earlier ages at menarche. So basically the question is, well, yeah, we know that there's a lot of factors that affect this outcome, but could there also be an environmental explanation for it? So there comes all the field of endocrine disrupting chemicals, and basically is external substances that could actually mimic receptors, and they could just actually pretend to be a hormone, and then they activate responses in the body that were not supposed to happen, or they actually could block the receptors and prevent the real hormones from actually attaching to the receptors and do their work. So basically, the question was, could that be an issue? And there has been many chemicals that have been noted to be endocrine disrupting chemicals. And this is a list, that I think that will give you an idea that there's many of them. We have pesticides, ingredients in household products and materials, solvents, metals, pharmaceuticals, and industrial ingredients. So there is like a whole plethora of chemicals that are possible endocrine disrupting chemicals, and that has been studied to more or less extent. Once I joined this project, I was interested in the polyfluoroalkyl substances, and I'm going to talk about my research on it specifically. So going back to the study, so the AVON longitudinal study of parents and children, which is the study that is being done by the Bristol University and where the CDC actually entered and conducted data collection as well. It's a population in the southern England, and basically all women who had an expected delivery date between 1991 and December of 1992 were invited to participate in the study. Women were from 3 health districts of what is known as the county of Avon, that has changed now, and they were able to enroll 14,500 pregnancies. That was about 72% of the eligible population. So imagine those 14,000 women being enrolled, and they still are being followed these days. So in the United States, I don't understand why we have so much problems to create cohort studies where these people have proved that this really is not that difficult, and they are still carrying on with this work today. So as I actually started to think about what I wanted to study in that cohort, and with the sensibility about the issues related to children's health, one thing that interested me was the concept of fetal origins of adult disease. So this was something that was put forth by Baker. So Baker's hypothesis was that low birth weight, possibly from malnutrition, is a determinant of adult disease. So basically, malnutrition has an impact on the fetus, as it have many, especially during periods of rapid cell division, that have been shown to have changes in the structure and function of the body, distribution of cell types, hormonal feedback, metabolic activity, and organ structure. So the question was, well, if we know that there is a precedent that something can impact the fetus, something like malnutrition can impact the fetus and cause all those issues, could we, or shall we, try to assess what are the exposures that the fetus has during development, and see whether later in life that can have an impact on their health. So that's where we started this process of just looking at how prenatal exposures to endocrine disrupting chemicals could have an impact on human health. And as I mentioned, one of the substances that I became interested were the polyfluoroalkyl substances. And there were very different reasons for it. One is that they are everywhere. They are they could be found in the water, they can be found in the food, and they are found at very low levels. But the thing is that if you drink water that is contaminated at low levels, but you do it on a daily basis, then your body is just going to start accumulating all those contaminants in it. And it may, the body is a really fabulous machine, so it may metabolize all of that. It may get rid of that waste, and it may never be impacted. But sometimes that is not so. So what is the chance that people who have this exposure have an impact on human health and causes a specific outcome? That's what we look when we are thinking about epidemiology. So even though there has been a lot of regulation, environmental regulation, and there has been including the phase out of certain of these PFOS, PFOA, and PFHXS, The names are more complicated, so I'm just gonna keep it simple. So even though there has been environmental regulation that has phased out these chemicals, and the levels in the US population has been going down, and that has been observed in other populations as well, what happens in this business is that when you phase out one chemical, then you have to introduce another one so that you can continue production of whatever it is that you're doing. So you would still have to study these contaminants because you still need to figure out how they have an impact on health, such that when all those others who are pretty much similar start to kick in and start to be found in the population, you can actually go ahead and have an idea of what the impact is before, the levels are too high. So in a way, we just inferences of the contaminants that we study, we use the associations that we study to make inferences of the new family of contaminants that it's coming next. And as I was part of that project, I really had the opportunity to do a lot of research in different aspects, all related to women's reproduction and also to metabolism, because metabolism is another aspect that is regulated by the endocrine system that could be impacted from exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals. So I was able to do studies where we first, in that cohort, we had to collect all the data on puberty and pubertal status in age at menarche. So basically, we started collecting that data. Well, the people who planned the study, because data had been collected when I started to work with them, but data was collected at age 8 and in girls, and then every year they would be asked what was their age at menarche and to describe their extent of their pubertal status. And then we took the blood samples that were stored that had been collected from the pregnant women, and then the mothers, and then we actually assessed them for the different contaminants. So I had the opportunity to look at what was the distribution and predictors of menarche in these girls who participated in the study. Then one of the studies that we did addressed growth, because growth is also another component of the endocrine system that can be impacted by endocrine disrupting chemicals. And this was really a great opportunity in terms of being able, the good thing about a cohort study is that you can explore different outcomes, not only one, and then that's why we were able to study growth, and we found that the girls who had higher levels of prenatal exposure to these contaminants or family of chemicals had lower levels at birth, So that was lower weight at birth. So that was really important. That was an important contribution to the literature, and that's also something that has been explored further, and there has been a whole lot of other studies that have confirmed this association. We also were interested, I was also interested in the aspect of metabolism, so we look at serum lipids in females, so we look at whether prenatal exposure as measured in the mother's blood was associated with serum lipids, that's cholesterol, HDL, LDL, at 7 years of age in females, and also females at age 7 and age 15. So basically, we found that there was an inverse association as well, the opposite. Higher levels actually had a higher, people who had higher exposure levels had higher levels of serum lipids. Then one thing leads to another, and the thing is, we have talked about the fertility rates. I didn't mention that, but increases in PCOS, and then that means that there's higher testosterone levels in women. So if we know that cholesterol is increased and impacted by these exposures, and cholesterol is a substrate from which testosterone arises, then could actually testosterone be impacted as well. And we also find that in this cohort, testosterone levels were higher in women who were prenatally exposed to these contaminants or with the higher exposure levels. So, Oops, okay, let me just go back. So a lot of the work that I did, and we still are doing work with this cohort, but I just wanted to mention the papers that were the most relevant, that had been the most scientifically relevant and had been actually highly cited, as we say in scientific lingo, which means that you have produced a piece of work that others read and they find that it provides information that is valid for them to, as something that needs to be pursued further. And before I finish, and I'm so behind, I want to very quickly talk about what I'm working on right now. So right now I'm working on a study that is called Environmental Health Disparities in Rural Appalachia. This is a collaboration between Johns Hopkins University and ETSU, and this project was put together within a center, which is a center, NIH-funded Center on Environmental Health Disparities. So this is a grant that was given to Johns Hopkins University, and we became partners in the process where we are looking at the rural component. So one component of the center is to look for urban-rural differences, and we are the rural arm. These things are, so we are looking, as we look at COPD, there were several reasons why COPD is important in our region. One of them, or to study COPD, one of them is that if you look at death rates for COPD, they are high in Tennessee. So then the question is, why is that happening? Another thing that is of interest is to think that there is, at the national level, a higher prevalence of COPD in rural regions. Half of Tennessee is highly rural, so then that's another thing that we need to keep in mind. So not only in Appalachia, 67% of the counties are rural compared to 20% in the US, which means we have more rural counties, we have more people with COPD. Poverty is another factor that is related with COPD. We also have higher poverty rates in Appalachia, and there are issues related to health disparities that we have noted in this area as well, which makes Appalachia a place where we need to be concerned about as for the reasons with which COPD, or why COPD is more prevalent. We know that COPD really is an umbrella term to include many conditions, respiratory conditions that are really caused by smoking. So one of the things that is also important to keep in mind is that Tennessee is a state where the current cigarette use among adults is high. Not among the highest, but it's high. And cigarette smoking is one of the main reasons why COPD can occur. But there are also other sources of air pollution in Appalachia that could be impactful, and we need to think about. We have coal burning, woods burning inside the houses. We have a lot of trash burning, which is outside the house. But the thing is, like, sometimes those same solid fuels are used inside the houses to actually burn and create energy and heat, mostly in the winter. And there's also a lot of smoking, and a lot of the people, as you know, smoke inside. So those are also sources of air pollution in Appalachia. And then the concern is, we know that COPD is caused by smoking, but if we get people with COPD who are non-smokers, how could these factors influence their health? So that is basically what this study aims to do. First, we want to identify sources of indoor air pollution in rural households in Appalachia. Second, we want to determine the associated risk for respiratory health effects among individuals with COPD. And third, we want to know how diet can actually, and body mass can actually impact the association or possible association between indoor air pollution and COPD. And COPD exacerbations, really, because these people already have COPD, so we're looking at how these exposures can exacerbate their signs or symptoms of COPD. So basically, in this study, we're following individuals for 9 months. So we're enrolling them into the study, and we're visiting the households 3 times for a week. And during that entire week, we're going to be collecting data on indoor air pollutants and health outcomes, or the respiratory symptoms. And these are the pollutants that we are going to measure. We measure particles, nitrogen oxides, airborne nicotine, allergens, surface dust. We also do household inspections, and we measure ammonia. And this is the type of equipment that we leave in the house for a week, and this type of equipment actually tells us information about the PMs, the NO, the ammonia, and the airborne nicotine. So it tells us a lot of what is going on there. And then we use that information to look at the associations with exacerbations for COPD. And this study was started last year. So we started data collection last June, really. And we, at this point, have been able to enroll 20 individuals in the study, of which we have completed, for 17 of them, we have completed their home visit one. So for 7 days, we had the monitors going, and we collected data on their health and environment. And then for 9 of them, we were already studying home visit 2, and soon we'll start home visit 3 as well. So it's a very interesting project, but it really is very resource intensive. We have a lot of really wonderful partners here in the region. We work with a physician here in Johnson City who has been a champion in the process of believing that this is something that could bring information to their peers and wanting to help us in the enrollment. And eventually our idea is that not our idea, but what we're gonna do is that we're gonna be able to provide to the participants information that is related to how their health can be impacted by whatever sources of indoor air pollutants they have in their homes. And it takes really a village to be able to do this type of work. So this is our team in Johnson City. Not everyone is in the picture, but our team in Johnson City and the partners in Hopkins who are also relevant for this work. So it's a lot of people, a lot of communication, a lot of work, but it's really have been a wonderful experience for all of us. And then finally, but not least, I had to go back to the Puerto Rico. So I wanted to just advertisement, but I think that it's important. The Delta Omega, I cannot read it. The Delta Omega Honorary Society in Public Health is doing a fundraiser, and this fundraiser is the goal is to raise $10,000 by summer 2018 to support a food pantry in Puerto Rico that is going to be put together by my alma mater, or one of them, the University of Puerto Rico School of Public Health. So if you feel inspired and you actually want to collaborate, please feel free to do so. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope that you have learned something that you could take home with you for your future. So thank you all for your attention. I was like,
I see that it's right at 1 o'clock. Are there any burning questions that you've been sitting on that you want to ask us?
Okay, so we're talking about like the endocrine blockers. I was just wondering if there was like a way that you guys have found to be able to avoid stuff like that. Like, is going organic gonna kind of help with products that are a little less?
So prevention. I think that it's a good idea to think about what sources are and to prevent them if you think that you can. I do try to buy everything that I can organic. If you cannot buy organic everything, because obviously it's more expensive, you can look at the different list of food sources and see which ones are the ones that are more likely to have more pesticides because the usage is very intensive, and see which are the ones that the usage is much less, and at least try to buy those. My friends at EPA says that if you actually take your fruits and you wash them with soapy water, as in the one that you use to wash your dishes, that's a really powerful way to remove toxins from the skin of the fruits. I personally wash tomatoes and apples and everything that have a skin that I will ingest. I I do clean them as well. I think plastics is also another big source. When you get all these plastics that you put in the microwave and they start to just like kind of get soft, that's a symbol that the structure of that plastic has changed, and then there is a chance that those substances enter into your food. So they leach in the food. So as those substances leach into your food, you're gonna eat it. And maybe that's not a whole lot, but if you do that all the time, then that's when those things start to accumulate in your body. So that's something I would say, like glass, if you can, just use glass to store your stuff and use glass to put things in the microwave rather than plastic. I think that's another thing I would consider. I am very careful with also the type of products that I bring into the house. I don't like things that are corrosive, things that are, everything that has like a big prevention site thing that says fumes. I try to keep them out of the house. And I didn't have time to talk about these because the reason why this project is so important is because our built environment is so closed that everything that goes in the house doesn't come out. So there's a whole lot of recommendations also that goes with that. So there's a lot of things that you can do. Unfortunately, based on the way that our economy works, it's becoming more and more important for the consumer to be the one who make their own choices, and even to be the one who actually have to pay for their protection and prevention options. The other day I was watching TV and I could not believe that Culligan had this very big advertisement. Culligan is a company that they used to develop filters for laboratory settings so that you can have the type of water that you needed to do your, grow your, I don't know how to say that in English, cultivos.
Culture.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you, I'm glad you're here. So the thing is that that's not my branch, so that's also why I couldn't remember the word. But now, they are making a lot of bucks selling that to homes so that you can actually buy your system and make sure that your water is clean because you are actually buying it yourself and doing it yourself. It should not be that way because I think that then it becomes an issue of you can only do that if you have money, and if you do not have money, you cannot protect yourself. So we in society really have to have a lot of conversations about how we want to handle some of those issues. So I'm sorry because that was like a very long answer to your short question, but there's a lot of information out there, and so it's very easy to get to inform yourself. And if you want more information, just send me an email and I'll be glad to forward anything you want to you.
Well, I want to thank you for coming. I hope that we will see you in February. And thank you again to Dr. Maisonet.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.